Chapter 27. Isaac learned his lesson. Isaac went back to Olivia's apartment to gather his things. There wasn't much, and he'd stayed pretty tidy while sleeping on her couch. "You should sleep over again sometime, this was kind of fun," Olivia said. "Minus the broken-hearted moping, of course." Isaac snorted and zipped his duffel bag shut. He was all for not being broken-hearted again. It was one of his main goals in life, in fact. "We can both cook dinner and fail miserably." Olivia's skills in the kitchen weren't much better than his. They'd eaten a lot of pasta and sandwiches. "I didn't hear you complaining about my killer peanut butter and jelly," Olivia said. "Pretty sure I didn't have taste buds most of the week," Isaac said. Olivia rolled her eyes. "Whatever. Go back home and starve." "I will not starve. I have cereal." The milk probably went bad, but he could eat it dry. She choked back laughter. "You make me feel so much better about myself." He shouldered his duffel. "Always happy to help." "Yeah, hey, you'll be okay, right?" The humor disappeared from her face, leaving concern in its place. The upcoming rent bill flashed in his mind. He could cover July, but it would knock out most of his bank account. If he didn't find an income by August, he'd be in trouble. It'd be nice if Sean was still willing to cover it, but they didn't work out the details before Isaac kicked him out, and they hadn't spoken since. Isaac had no intention of changing that. "I'll figure something out," Isaac promised. "And setting up today with Beck. You're not mad, right?" She played with the ends of her hair, twisting it around her fingers. Isaac adjusted the strap of his duffel bag. "Not really. We probably would have ended up at this point sooner or later. With how close their families were, it was inevitable." "Okay, because I really was just trying to help. I thought, since you never go home because of your ex, if you could get that back you might be happier. And after Sean, I thought you might need their support too." He took a deep breath. "Yeah, it'll be nice to go home again." She offered a small smile. "So we're good." "We're good," he assured her. "Thank you for everything this week." "Of course. I miss you at work." "I miss being there, honestly." He had too much free time without a job, and he couldn't even bring himself to write these days. "Maybe you can work in receiving on the weekends. I'll ask Tracy." He doubted Tracy, the head of the store management, would agree. They got through their deliveries during the week. There wasn't much to do in the receiving room over the weekend. But he appreciated how hard Olivia was trying for him. "Thanks. I should get going." "Okay. Call me if you need anything." "I will," he promised, and finally made his way out the door. So much had happened in a short time, his mind was still trying to catch up. He and Beck were on speaking terms again. Isaac had unblocked his phone number and everything. Meanwhile, Sean, the guy Isaac realized he was in love with 2 weeks ago, was not someone Isaac ever wanted to speak with again. Not after the way Sean used him, even after seeing how much Isaac hated the attention. He should have known better. All those people on Twitter had been right, there was no reason for Sean to date him, not if he wasn't getting something out of it. Isaac had been an idiot to think someone as gorgeous and amazing as supermodel Shawn Winters would be into him. "Dumb celebrities with their dumb publicity stunts," he grumbled, scuffing the sidewalk as he walked. Honestly, though, the worst part of all this was how it affected his career as a writer. His name would be associated with Shawn Winters for a long time, and publishers wouldn't hesitate to cash in on that. While that would get his book published, it wouldn't be because the publishers thought Isaac's book was actually any good. They'd publish trash if it meant sales. And after so many rejections, Isaac worried that was all his book was. If his novel really wasn't any good, then publishing it just because it would sell meant critics would tear it apart, and everyone would know it was only published because of Sean. All his dreams about writing the next great novel, and book clubs choosing his book, were going up in smoke. Even if he used a pen name, the publishers would still know who he was. And he didn't want a pen name. He'd always imagined his own name on the cover, not a pseudonym. "I can't believe I was so stupid," Isaac muttered. He opened the doors to the lobby in his complex and stomped into the elevator, jabbing the button for the 3rd floor. Like a celebrity would ever fall in love with a retail manager. He should have seen this coming from a mile away. He'd been so careful for the last 2 years, not dating anyone because he didn't trust them not to hurt him, and he'd forgotten all of that in Sean's gray and blue eyes. Well, at least he knew now, before the relationship dragged on too long. The elevator dinged and Isaac stepped out into the hall, pulling his phone out. With a few quick taps he deleted Sean's contact, and then he deleted their entire text history. He blocked Sean's number for good measure. Isaac wouldn't make the mistake of trusting a celebrity again. Chapter 28. Sean learned some family history. Sean stared slack-jawed at his oldest brother. Even Nick was surprised at what Tyler had said. What do you mean he bribed our mother? Nick demanded. I mean he found the prettiest girl he could find and then bribed her parents to push her towards marriage with him. At the time Mom was just starting out as an artist. Marrying rich meant she didn't need a day job while she worked on her art.
Sam stood.
He wanted to pace or go for a run, or just do something with all this energy, but Tyler's room was too small for him to do more than bounce on his feet next to the door. How do you know this? Grandparents told me, Tyler said. They visit every few months. I didn't know that, Nick said. Sean hadn't even known his maternal grandparents were alive. His father's parents had both died when Sean was a toddler, and he didn't remember ever meeting his other grandparents as a kid, so he'd assumed they'd passed away as well. Do they know what our family is like? If they were aware of how terrified Sean and his siblings were of angering their father, scared that his rage would one day be turned on them, if they'd known and done nothing, maybe Sean was better off never meeting them. Not all of it, Tyler said. Most of it they only learned recently. Dad threatened them not to come near us at one point and they took it seriously. They only started visiting me 6 years ago? 7. Wait, he threatened them? Nick asked. When did that happen? At least Sean wasn't the only one blindsided by this conversation. Geez, let me think, Tyler said, rubbing his chin. I was 12, maybe? So you would have been 8 and Sean was 6. Mom's depression started getting bad around then, so they wanted to see her and take care of her. Dad was probably worried they'd run off with her and us kids and ruin the whole legacy thing he had going, so he threatened to have them arrested. And as we've established, he could have paid off lawyers to fake whatever charges he wanted. Mom's depression started when Sean was that young? It shouldn't surprise him that he missed the signs. What 6-year-old even knows what the signs were? But maybe if he'd known, he could have helped her more. Wait, Nick said. He glanced between them. If they come forward about that now to a judge, do you think it would help fight Sean's conservatorship? They can argue that Dad's not a good guardian and have it transferred to them. Anything to get Sean out of that house. Sean didn't care much for the idea of strangers having control of him, and he wasn't sure why Nick cared, since he'd never done anything to help before, but Tyler shot the idea down before he could even consider it. It's their word against Dad's won't work. You need solid proof. Nick deflated. Darn. Thanks anyway, Sean said. He sat down again, turning the new information about his mother and grandparents over in his mind. The canvases in the closet caught his eye. Did Mom's art career ever go anywhere? He remembered her old art studio, but he didn't remember her working in there much. It was converted into the gym a few months before she died. Tyler laughed short and dry.
No.
Soon as Dad married her, she was too busy having kids. She didn't have time. Was that part of her depression? Marrying young and giving up her dreams, weighed down by 4 kids and a miserable husband and then cut off from her parents? Sean could almost see why she'd been so desperate for a way out. You should show Sean your art, Nick said. Yes, I want to see, Sean agreed, seizing the change in topic. Any more huge revelations and he'd need his own room next to Tyler's. Tyler agreed and moved to his closet, pulling out the canvases one by one and lining them up against the wall and the side of the bed. They were all space-themed in some way. Beautiful landscapes of galaxies and nebulas, planets hovering behind black cityscapes. Tyler rubbed the back of his neck while Sean studied them. It started as a therapy thing. You know, a creative outlet to express all my rage and aggression. But it made me feel closer to Mom. And it does work to calm me down. Why space? Sean asked. Tyler shrugged. I'm not allowed to draw people since I'd have to also design the clothes they wear, which pretty much limited me to landscapes and nature. And I don't know. Guess I like space because it's proof there's more out there than us, that our pathetic lives don't matter much in the grand scheme of things. What he means is he's a melodramatic edgelord, Nick chimed in. Shut up, Tyler said. No, I get it, Sean said. It makes sense. There was comfort in the fact that they were nothing but small parts of the universe in their own world even. He could go to another country and be another face in the crowd, no one important at all. You're both edgelords. Should have figured, Nick said. Sean ignored him and looked at one of the paintings more closely. It was 2 planets in opposite corners, one green and one blue, with a cloud of stars reaching between them. You can take one if you want, Tyler offered. You wouldn't mind? Sean asked. I give them away all the time. There's only so much room in here. I end up with most of them, Nick said. He does, Tyler confirmed. Luna picks one every time she visits. Sean picked up the painting he'd been looking at. The green planet was almost the same emerald green as Isaac's eyes, and the stars reminded him of the constellation of freckles on Isaac's face. This one. He might never see Isaac in person again, but he'd never forget him. Chapter 29. Isaac is too nice for his own good. Considering Beck had been completely absent from Isaac's life for 2 years, he inserted himself into Isaac's daily routine like he'd been around the whole time. While Isaac applied to jobs online and wrote cover letter after cover letter, Beck texted him about whatever book he was reading and plans to hang out over the weekend. Around dinner time, without fail, he showed up with takeout or with ingredients to cook something himself. "You can't win me over with food," Isaac declared while drooling over the homemade chicken wings Beck pulled out of the oven. "I do this to make sure you eat properly," Beck countered, "because cereal does not count. If it's acceptable for breakfast, it should be acceptable for any meal." Isaac would stand firm on that point until the end of time. Beck stood on the opposite hill. "It is barely acceptable for breakfast. Scrambled eggs and bacon take 10 minutes to make. Max, throw in some peppers or broccoli and you're golden." "Yeah, and in that time I could have eaten and cleaned up a bowl of cereal." Beck tilted his face to the ceiling and took a deep breath. "I don't understand how you survived for 2 years on your own." While Beck wasn't looking, Isaac snatched one of the wings. "And I don't understand how you make these so addicting, yet here we are." "It's called seasoning," Beck retorted. "And wait till I put him on a plate, for Pete's sake." The wing burned his fingertips and his mouth, both because of temperature and the spices. It was worth it for the crisp, tangy taste. Isaac stepped out of Beck's way while he ate, and Beck divided the wings onto 2 plates. Celery and carrot sticks were already on the table, along with a variety of dips and sauces. Beck liked his wings extra spicy, at a level that would leave Isaac crying for days. "Now you can come eat, you wild animal," Beck said. "Thanks for cooking again," Isaac said. He sat down and picked up another wing while Beck poured more hot sauce over his. "Like I said, someone needs to make sure you eat properly." Isaac rolled his eyes. Even now, when he was deliberately trying to win Isaac back, Beck struggled to actually say what he meant. Not that it would work on Isaac anyway, but Isaac still found it endearing, and he hated that. He didn't want to find any part of Beck endearing. As soon as they were done eating and had everything put away, Beck turned to Isaac. "Feel like going out for ice cream?" Isaac narrowed his eyes. "Only if you pay. Obviously, you jobless dork. Come on. There was a place not too far from here I wanted to check out." It wasn't like Isaac had anything better to do, so he followed Beck outside and through the city, dread settling in his stomach. He had a pretty good idea which ice cream shop Beck had in mind. Sure enough, he pulled open the door to the same 50s theme shop Isaac and Sean had gone to on their second date. It was packed now compared to the end of April, every booth full and a line winding all the way to the door. "Have you been here before?" Beck asked, claiming a spot in line. "I thought the retro theme was interesting." "It's cool," Isaac said. "I've been here." He crossed his arms and picked a spot on the checkered floor to stare at. "Yeah? They any good?" "It's good." "Alright, what gives? Why are you in a mood all of a sudden?" Beck demanded, stepping into Isaac's view. "Nothing." "Bull." The person ahead of them moved up, but Beck stayed put, planting his feet. Sighing, Isaac lifted his gaze from the floor. "The last time I came here was with Sean, alright?" Beck went quiet. "Oh." Isaac pushed him forward in line. "It's just the first time I've gone back to one of our dates. Thinking about him still hurts." "So don't think about him," Beck said. "You're with me, not that jackass, and we're going to go watch the fireworks after this." Beck insulting Sean was like the pot calling the kettle black, but Isaac didn't point that out. "There are fireworks tonight?" Beck rolled his eyes. "Have you not been paying attention? Your city is doing them tonight because it's a Friday." Was it? Without a job, Isaac barely knew what day it was. He didn't need to, for the most part. 4th of July is on Sunday, Beck reminded him. "Oh right. Honestly, your head is always in the clouds," Beck said. Isaac shrugged. Daydreaming was good for writing, so he'd never curbed the habit. It did, however, mean he wasn't good at paying attention to things like this. "Your coworker said there's a good spot to watch them in the park," Beck went on. "I thought we could bring the ice cream there." "Yeah, sounds good," Isaac said, finally cluing into what Beck's plan was. One of their first dates in high school was on the 4th of July. They grabbed ice cream before finding a spot to watch the show by themselves. The show had been spectacular, and they'd laid there for hours after that stargazing. Beck was trying to recreate that night. Shaking his head, Isaac let it go. Beck could recreate as many as he wanted, it wouldn't change anything. They waited in line for a while before it was their turn to pick out what flavors they wanted. Isaac chose cookie dough and caramel fudge swirl, while Beck went with mint chocolate chip. Ice cream cones in hand, they headed to the park, claiming an end of a picnic table for themselves. Thanks for the ice cream, Isaac said. You're welcome. How's the job hunt going? Isaac grimaced. Terrible. I want something where the public can't just come up to me, which knocks out like all of retail, which is the only experience I have. You're too good for retail anyway, Beck said. What about an online gig? Writers are always in demand, and you can freelance from anywhere. I don't know anything about freelancing. I'd need to do research first. Dude, just ask me. Isaac blinked. I thought you were a photographer. I'm a freelance photographer. Why do you think I'm still in town? To be honest, I thought you were just driving back and forth every day. The timing didn't match up, so he should have wondered how Beck was here so often. Wait, did you move here? No, not exactly, Beck said, scratching the back of his head and avoiding Isaac's gaze. Don't worry about it. You're not just staying in a motel, are you? Isaac asked. How much money did Beck make as a freelancer? Beck scoffed. No. I sleep in my car, and my gym has a branch not far from here that I shower at. Oh my God, Beck. What? I camp all the time, it's not that different. The tips of his ears were red. How long are you planning to sleep in your car? Isaac asked. Until I know you're going to be okay, Beck said. Isaac frowned, but Beck spoke before he could. Do you see anyone besides me during the day? No. Beck nodded. We've established you can't be trusted with food, and frankly, I don't trust you to be alone for any length of time. You with nothing but your thoughts is a recipe for trouble. Isaac couldn't deny he had a point. How do you even fit in your car? I manage. Beck shrugged. Isaac rubbed his forehead with his free hand. His natural instinct to learning any of his friends was sleeping in their car was to offer them his couch, and he was having a hard time persuading himself he shouldn't give Beck the same offer. You won't convince me to go home, not until you have a job, which you just admitted isn't happening for a while, so don't even try. Somehow, the thought hadn't even occurred to Isaac. I wasn't going to. Good. The car really isn't that bad once you're used to it. That did not comfort Isaac as much as Beck probably thought it did. His conscience wouldn't let him ignore this, no matter how bad of an idea it was. If you won't go home, then sleep on my couch. Beck stared at him. Are you serious? I can't just let you sleep in your car, Isaac said. He focused on his melting ice cream. It doesn't mean anything, don't overthink it. Beck was quiet for a moment. All right. Thank you. Neither of them said anything until the fireworks started. Chapter 30. Sean's hope is rekindled. Everything Sean learned from Tyler tossed around his head for days. He couldn't even face his father afterwards. The man was even worse than Sean had thought. What kind of person kept their eldest son hidden away in a psych ward when his son didn't need that kind of care anymore? Who threatened their kids' grandparents to keep them from interfering? Eric Winters cared only about his company, and heaven help anyone who endangered it. Before he'd gone to visit Nick, Sean had already realized he couldn't stay where he was anymore. But after that visit, Sean was even more determined to find a way to free himself. He was also terrified to try. One wrong move and he'd end up like Tyler, locked away and forgotten. No, darling, please, we need seductive, we need sexy, the photographer complained, lowering his camera. This cologne is power and confidence, you need to show it. Give me. The man snapped his fingers while he thought. Walking off a battlefield. You've vanquished your enemies, you are power. Sean shut his eyes and took a deep breath. This photoshoot was going to become a battlefield if the man didn't start taking pictures. He shifted his pose. A little less murderous, perhaps. Take the picture or I'm dumping this cologne all over your camera, Sean threatened. Sighing dramatically, the man snapped several pictures. Work with me, darling, you're so stiff. Relax. The fight is over. Over? No, his fight against his father was just starting. He shifted poses again, settling into something more natural. The bottle of cologne was lower, almost at hip height, and he opened his mouth a little and glared. Oh, I like it, darling, very fierce. His expression tightened. There'd better be something usable from these pictures, because he could not handle this photographer for another minute. The man sensed Sean was at the end of his rope and announced a quick break. Change into the next outfit. Get some water and we'll jump right in. Sean stormed out from the studio lights, the temperature dropping instantly. He shoved the cologne bottle in an aide's hands and beelined for his changing room. Hannah waylaid him on the way there. Sean, your father wants to speak with you. I'm in the middle of a shoot, Sean protested. He hated the photo shoot, but it was the lesser of two evils compared to a meeting with his father. He called in another model to take over for the rest of the day, Hannah said. He wants to experiment with some new talent. Sean felt sorry for the model. Phoenix Industries was a huge name and it took a lot of effort to get in the door, but it was not worth it. Models were not treated well, and any cocky attitude was sent packing on day one. Still, it was better to be a naive model than a jaded one like Sean. Hannah dragged him to his father's office, leaving him alone with Eric for the first time in weeks. Sean had grown adept at avoiding him at home over the years. His father's office was small and orderly, since most of his time was spent in his personal workstation across the hall. This was mainly the room he had meetings in. A wall of windows let in the afternoon light, and Eric leaned back in a large black leather chair. I thought we had a deal, Eric said. You make media appearances every week on your own will, and I'd end your conservatorship after the autumn show. Sean said nothing. Why aren't you making appearances anymore, Sean? Isaac no longer wants to see me, Sean admitted. The deal's broken. Ah. Eric pressed his fingertips together and rocked in his chair. And here I thought you might be trying a strategy. Deny the public what they want for a bit, and then they jump on new stories with 10 times the force. Sean kept his gaze on the edge of Eric's desk. Sorry to disappoint. I am disappointed, Eric agreed. He stood from his desk and approached the windows, holding his hands behind his back. I wanted you to prove that you could handle something on your own. I guess ending your conservatorship wasn't enough motivation. What else can I do to end it? Sean asked. Eric didn't answer right away. Why doesn't that boy want to see you? Sean blanched at the idea of sharing anything about his relationship with the man. He found out I was staging our appearances. He doesn't like the attention. And you didn't think to tell him I forced you to make those appearances? I didn't think you wanted me to tell him about our deal, Sean said carefully. He watched his father for any sign of the verbal trap that must be coming. He signed the non-disclosures. If you thought it best, I would have trusted your judgment. That whole time he could have been upfront about why they were in the media so much. Was that what his father was saying? Sean could punch him. He still would have been using Isaac, but if Isaac had consented at the beginning, everything would have been different. He wouldn't have kicked Sean out. Eric turned from the windows to face him. I apologize for not making that clear. If you are able to convince that boy to go out with you again and continue your appearances, I will uphold my end of the deal. Sean stared at him, daring to let himself believe. There was still a chance? Only if Isaac agreed, of course, but Sean could explain everything properly this time, put all his cards on the table. He could be free in 3 months. I'll figure it out, Sean promised, spinning on his heel to the door. He hadn't had this much hope fluttering in his chest in years. Chapter 31 Domestic Bliss. Through most of high school and college, Isaac had imagined living alone with Beck. The reality was a little different than he'd thought it would be. He didn't wake up in Beck's arms for one or fall asleep to the sound of him breathing. Beck wasn't allowed in Isaac's room at all, in fact, and they kept a full couch cushion between them when watching TV. The little things Isaac had pictured were the same, though. Beck spoiled him with good cooking, and he dragged Isaac on his morning runs. They bantered throughout the day, and just fit together the way they always had. Living with Beck was easy. They knew each other so well they adjusted to each other's habits as naturally as breathing. Beck would go out for a few hours throughout the day to take pictures around the city to sell as stock photos, or if he had a client he'd go out to find the image they needed. He rarely photographed clients, having made his niche in nature scenes and still life photos. While he was gone, Isaac job hunted and tried not to throw his laptop out the window. If one more application had him upload a resume, and then manually fill in all the same information anyway, he was going to scream. The door opened and Beck let himself in carrying a laundry bag. Why does your laundry room feel haunted? It's the lights, Isaac answered. Only half of them ever worked at one time, and if the weather was bad they'd flicker. How much do a few light bulbs cost? Beck grumbled. He dumped his laundry on the couch and started folding it, still complaining about the poor building maintenance. Isaac sipped a cup of tea and looked over his latest application, letting Beck's rant fade to the background. 2 years ago this was all he'd ever wanted. Him and Beck together, sharing the little things in life, like creepy laundry rooms and inattentive building managers. If he let himself he could have this. If he could just forget that one night, he and Beck could have everything they once dreamed of together. He curled his fingers around his lukewarm tea. Forgetting wasn't easy, and if he was honest Sean still took up too many of his thoughts. It wasn't fair, since Sean had never felt anything for Isaac. But he'd sure acted like he had. Isaac missed his quiet looks and talking to him about books. Sean had a way of filling up a room without saying a word, but at the same time he'd give Isaac his undivided attention, like Isaac had been the only thing that mattered. Is the job you're applying to that bad? Beck asked, tearing him from his thoughts. Huh. Oh no. I was thinking about Sean again. Beck scowled and shook out a shirt to fold. He doesn't deserve your time. I know. No matter what Isaac had thought of Sean's actions, they hadn't been real. He had to remember that. Or better yet, not think of them at all. Beck folded his last shirt and carefully put his clothes in his duffel bag to keep the living room tidy. Kicking the bag under the coffee table, he turned to the kitchen. I'm thinking tacos for dinner sound good? Yeah, that's fine, Isaac said. Beck nodded and got to work, pulling out the necessary ingredients. The counter was instantly full, and he grimaced. Your kitchen is too freaking small. It was not the first time he'd made this complaint. Isaac picked up his laptop. You can use the table. No, you're working. I can do this in the living room. He set the laptop on the coffee table and sat on the floor back to the couch. Beck spread out over the table, and Isaac tried to find motivation to finish the application. He ended up watching Beck instead. He'd always liked watching Beck cook. Used to sit at the table and just watch him when they were dating. Sometimes he'd go up behind Beck and wrap his arms around his waist and put his chin on Beck's shoulder. He had the urge to do that now and shook the thought out of his head. It wasn't like that between them anymore, and Isaac was the one who wanted it to stay that way. Didn't he? He forced himself to stare at his computer screen until Beck set a plate down beside him. The tacos smelled amazing and he smiled. Thanks, Beck. You're welcome, Beck said, sitting on the floor next to him with his own plate, their shoulders brushing. Maybe it was because he'd been watching Beck cook. Maybe Isaac did it because he'd been thinking about Sean. Maybe he'd missed Beck more than he was willing to admit. Maybe for one moment he wanted to pretend the last 2 years hadn't happened. What are you staring at? Beck asked, lowering his taco. Isaac leaned over and kissed. Chapter 32. Sean puts his cards on the table. Your call has been forwarded to voicemail. Sean hung up. That was all he'd received for 2 days, and all his texts to Isaac had gone unanswered. Isaac had either blocked him or was intent on ignoring him. Not that Sean could blame him, but it made reconciling with him difficult. He grabbed his car keys and headed out the door. Showing up unannounced at Isaac's apartment might not get him anywhere, but it was the only option left. Unless Isaac moved, in which case Sean was screwed. He shook his head. Positive thoughts. This would work. He'd explain everything, and Isaac would forgive him, and things would go back to the way they'd been. His whole body was jittery with nervous energy while he drove, and by the time he reached Isaac's apartment he felt like he might throw up. What was he going to do if Isaac didn't forgive him? Was any explanation good enough to justify what he'd done? He had to try. Riding a wave of forced confidence, he made his way up to Isaac's door and knocked. Coming, Isaac called on the other side. Hearing his voice after so long made Sean's knees weak. Then the door opened and he got his first glimpse of those gorgeous green eyes and freckles in 2 weeks, and he couldn't breathe. Isaac's bright eyes dimmed when they saw him. What are you doing here? I wanted to talk to you and explain everything. What's to explain? Isaac asked. You took advantage of me.
Sean winced.
I did, and that was wrong, but there's more to it than that. And there's something I need to ask you. You don't get to ask him anything. Beck shoved Isaac out of the way and blocked Sean's view into the apartment. What the hell are you doing here?
Sean demanded.
Isaac wouldn't have let him in willingly, and Sean failed to come up with a reason Beck had for still being there. I live here, Beck said proudly. You what? Sean asked. Did Isaac get back together with him? How had that happened? He was sleeping in his car. Isaac called over Beck's shoulder. That explained it. Isaac was too nice a person to let anyone sleep in their car if he could help them, even his slimy ex. Some of Sean's anger cooled, and he focused back on the reason he was here. Isaac, may I please speak with you? No, Beck answered, shoving Sean away from the door. You have nothing he wants to hear. A smack. You don't get to decide who I talk to, Isaac stated. Beck looked back at him, and then the door was closed in Sean's face. This was not going at all like he'd hoped. Beck was an unexpected complication. He'd love to know how those two were on speaking terms again, especially since he was trying to accomplish the same thing with Isaac. Isaac's voice grew louder on the other side of the door, and then it was wrenched open. Beck stepped into the hall. I'm going for a walk. I'll be back in 20 minutes. If he's crying, I will mess up your face so bad you won't have a career anymore. Beck, go, Isaac ordered. Another glare, and then Beck set off down the hall. Sighing, Isaac ran a hand through his hair and retreated inside the apartment, leaving the door open for Sean to follow. Still reeling from the last 30 seconds, Sean was a few seconds behind Isaac. He jolted forward and shut the door behind him as Isaac collapsed on his couch. 2 plates of tacos sat untouched on the coffee table on either side of Isaac's laptop. "All right, let's hear your brilliant explanation," Isaac said. Sean hovered uncertainly in the living room. Should he sit on the couch? That felt too close for their current status. He grabbed a kitchen chair instead and dragged it into the other room. Sitting down, he rubbed his palms over his pants and tried to slow his racing heart. This was it. He had to convince Isaac right here and now to give him another chance. "My dad was the one who forced me to stay in the public eye so much," Sean started. "When was the last time he'd had any water?" His mouth felt like sand. "It was up to me to decide when and where, but since the public was so interested in who I finally found to date, it meant the company was getting a huge amount of exposure. He wanted to ride that publicity until the autumn fashion show." Isaac did not look impressed yet. "So you were following orders? I was an assignment to you." "No," Sean shook his head. "I refused to do it at first because I like you and didn't want to use you that way." He curled his fingers into a fist to try and hide how badly they were shaking. "What changed?" Sean took a deep breath. "Not many people know this, but I'm actually under conservatorship." Isaac straightened on the couch. Sean stared at the coffee table. "My father decides who I work for and when and has total control of my bank accounts. I wouldn't even be a model if I had a choice, but it's the only work he lets me do. I had the impression he wasn't a great dad, but..." "He's terrible," Sean stated. "He offered to end the conservatorship if I publicly dated you. That's why I agreed." There. He'd admitted it. Whether or not Isaac forgave him, well, that was up to Isaac. All Sean could do was hope he'd explained himself enough. Chapter 33. Isaac would like less problems. Isaac had to admit, he wasn't expecting Sean's explanation to be anything like that. "You're trying to get out of your conservatorship so you can access your own money?" "Yes," Sean said. "It would mean I'd be free from my father. I could live my life the way I want to." Isaac tried to wrap his mind around it. On some level, he understood why Sean had used him like that. Being trapped in a world he didn't want to be in had to be hard, and Isaac had picked up enough clues about Eric Winters to never want to meet the man. But he couldn't forgive Sean for taking advantage of him and leading him on either. "Thank you for telling me," Isaac said. "But I'm still mad at you." Sean shut his eyes. "That's fair. I apparently could have gone about this whole thing differently and been honest from the beginning. It would have saved both of us a lot of heartache if I had." Isaac hummed. He picked at a loose thread in his shorts. "I wouldn't have gone out with you just for publicity. But it might have been different if he'd known Sean only intended for things to remain platonic. To help someone earn their freedom, he might have been willing to put up with a few months of media scrutiny. Then again, considering how intense that media attention had become, maybe he wouldn't have." "I didn't ask you out for publicity," Sean said softly. "I did genuinely want to date you. My father just took advantage of that. Of both of us." "He did," Isaac agreed. "And that was wrong of him. But it was also wrong of you to see how much I was struggling and ignore that."
Sean nadid.
"It was. I was desperate for everything to work out, and I kept telling myself it would be okay in the end. But it's not." Isaac shook his head. "You knew how scared I was to trust you, and that's why I can't forgive you. Because you knew. And you used me anyway." Sean took a deep breath. "Yeah." Neither of them said anything for a moment. Isaac took a second to get his thoughts in order. They needed to wrap this up before Beck came back. That was another headache he'd need to figure out. He didn't know what possessed him to kiss Beck, but he wanted to beat it with a stick. Things were already complicated. Kissing Beck didn't help anything. "You said you wanted to ask me something?" Isaac prompted. "I did."
Sean hesitated.
He looked on the verge of crying, which Isaac had never seen before, and he hated that look on Sean. I was going to ask if you'd go out with me again. My father is still willing to honor our bargain if we keep up weekly appearances until the fall show. But I think I already know your answer." Isaac almost laughed. He should have expected Sean to ask something like that. "I don't want to be used again, Sean." "I know. I thought, if I explained everything to you, you might forgive me and we could do this the way we should have from the start. Wishful thinking, I guess." "Yes, it was," Isaac said. Sean shut his eyes again and nodded, taking careful breaths. "Then may I ask a favor?" Isaac raised a brow. "What is it?" "Just pretend we're still dating until the show. It doesn't have to mean anything, but as long as we're seen in public once a week, my father would have no reason not to uphold his end of the deal. Seriously? Isaac ran a hand through his hair. Was Sean really asking him that? I know it's a lot to ask, and I have no right to expect this from you. You can say no. But if you think you can stand me for a few weeks, I don't know how else to be free from my father. He didn't look up to beg with his eyes, or even see Isaac's reaction at all. He'd said Isaac could say no, but how could Isaac? How could Isaac refuse a man begging for his help, to be free from a life he was trapped in? Okay. Sean's head shot up. You'll do it. Isaac nodded. I'll do it, but only until the autumn show. After that, I never want to see you again.
Sean visibly winced.
I understand. Thank you for giving me this much. He stood. I'll let myself out. Oh, can you unblock my number? So I can text you details about where to meet. Isaac would have to do that, wouldn't he? Yeah, I'll do it later. Nodding, Sean silently slipped out the door. Isaac sank back into the couch. How had his life become such a mess? What had he ever done to deserve all this? The door opened again a few minutes later and Beck walked in, eyeing Isaac critically. Well, guess I don't need to end his career. Not yet, Isaac agreed. Beck nodded, his expression shifting into something shy and hopeful. Should we talk about what happened before he came? Isaac's face flushed. He regretted that impulsive moment so much. Why weren't time machines a thing? He could really use one. Nope, we should not. He grabbed his cold tacos and retreated into his room, shutting and locking the door. Chapter 34. The awkward date. Pretending to date Isaac was much harder than lying to him for 2 months had been. He'd been able to forget he was lying sometimes. He couldn't forget their current arrangement was fake, that Isaac wasn't happy to see him and would rather be anywhere else. The fact that anywhere else might include an ex who'd broken his heart stung more than words could say. Isaac met him in front of the movie theater, hands shoved in his pockets and scowling at the paparazzi already taking pictures. This was off to a great start. Sean might be in over his head. Hey, how was your vacation? Sean asked loudly enough for the reporters to hear. There had been no vacation, but it would give people a reason for why they hadn't been seen together in almost 3 weeks. Hannah had sent him some articles wondering if they'd broken up, and he needed to smooth the rumors over. The last thing he wanted was his fans thinking he was heartbroken and taking it out on Isaac. Isaac's scowl turned to him, and his stomach twisted. He probably should have discussed the lie with him first. It was nice. Can we go inside? So much for avoiding the rumor mill gossiping about trouble in their relationship. No one would look at these photos and think they were getting along, not with a look like that on Isaac's face. But they'd be looking. That would still meet his father's requirements for their deal. Bad publicity was still publicity after all. Sure. Sean opened the door for him and Isaac slipped inside. The paparazzi had gotten what they wanted and most were running off to post the pictures. He could only imagine what the tabloids were going to say about them after that unfriendly meetup. Sean had bought their tickets in advance, but they had time for snacks. Isaac refused to make conversation while they bought popcorn and drinks, and only followed after Sean to their theater with an absent hum. They sat rigidly beside each other, and Sean fiddled with the edge of the popcorn bag. He'd never wished to be better at talking to other people than right now. What was he supposed to say? What are you reading? He asked. The Goldfinch by Donna Tartt. Sean waited a beat, but Isaac didn't add anything else. Is it any good? Too early to tell. The sound of the previews washed over them. Sean wanted to bang his head on the seat in front of him. This wasn't his Isaac. The cheer and 1,000-watt smile he was used to were nowhere to be found. He might as well be sitting next to a stranger. Their first date hadn't even been this awkward. Thank goodness he'd planned today's date in a theater, where they wouldn't have to talk much. Surviving the previews would be challenging enough. He wanted things back to the way they used to be, wanted Isaac to push up the arm separating their seats and cuddle up against his side, the way they used to watch movies together. He missed how easy it used to be between them, how they'd felt comfortable talking about their hobbies right from the start. He wanted Isaac's trust back. Was this how Beck felt? Was this why Beck was trying so hard to win Isaac back despite how badly he'd hurt him? Sean hated that he understood now, hated that he was in the same position as someone who caused so much pain. Hated that he would do the same thing Beck was too, trying to make Isaac happy again and make up for all that pain. One thought immediately came to mind. Do you remember the charity appearance we did at the animal shelter? Sean asked. The random question threw Isaac, and Sean earned himself a look other than apathy. What about it? We never did get to take pictures with the cats. Do you want to go back? No matter how much he hated Sean now, there was no way Isaac could be unhappy around animals. Sean wanted him to be happy again. Isaac deserved to enjoy their time together, even if he couldn't stand the company. From now on, the rest of their time together would be about Isaac and what he enjoyed. It was the least Sean could do for him. Are you going to pass out again if I get scratched? Sean had almost forgotten that part of the day. Everything else that happened with Isaac overshadowed it. I will do my very best not to. Unless that would make Isaac smile. He had no pride when it came to accomplishing that. As good an appearance as any, I guess, Isaac shrugged, trying to play it off like he didn't care. But Sean could hear the excitement in his voice. It was small, but Sean would savor every victory he earned. He had to. These memories would be the only thing he had of Isaac after the fashion. Chapter 35. Isaac isn't the only one crying. Kissing Beck had been a mistake of the highest caliber. It reinvigorated Beck's determination to win him over, and the man didn't play fair. Movie nights ended with them in a giant heap, Beck carting his fingers through Isaac's curls. He started baking Isaac's favorite desserts, and he came back to the apartment with a book for Isaac. It was Beck at his best, his sweetest, most tender side. He limited his competitiveness to video games, reined in his temper when Isaac accidentally threw out the grease Beck had been saving. He bowed to Isaac's every whim. It should have been everything Isaac ever wanted from him, but by controlling the uglier parts of himself, Beck didn't really feel like the Beck Isaac had grown up with. It was like Beck a little tough-left, just different enough to be noticeable and off-putting, but not enough to say anything. They went to a local minor league baseball game together, and the day after that they went bowling. They spent a weekend camping in the mountains, and Beck took 100 photos of Isaac hiking. He hugged Isaac before and after every fake date with Sean, and Isaac let himself hide in the familiar circle of his arms while his heart pieced itself together again. Being with Sean again was hard and confusing. He wanted so badly for everything to be real, to trust that Sean really did just want him to be happy now, but how could he when all their time before had been fake? What had Sean said merely to keep the charade going? And what had been the truth? Why are you torturing yourself like this? Beck asked when Isaac came back from a coffee date with Sean. He was lying flat on the couch, Isaac draped over him. He asked for help, Isaac said. But why does it have to be you? Shouldn't any old schmuck off the street be good enough? Isaac didn't know. Sean had his pick of just about any person in town, so why Isaac? If the answer was what Isaac hoped it was, then that was also why Isaac felt compelled to help Sean. Something about their relationship had been real, and Isaac wanted to honor that part of it. Could you read to me? Isaac asked. What? Why? Because listening to Sean read had left Isaac content and peaceful, and he was desperate for any kind of peace. Please. Fine, whatever. What book? Isaac didn't grab his current book, choosing instead an old favorite of his called The Alchemist, by Paulo Coelho. Beck did not have the same smooth reading voice as Sean, and he kept interrupting himself to question the character's choices. After half an hour, Isaac took the book from him. Beck apologized with creme brulee. They acted like it didn't happen the next day, and they went on another date/no-date to the zoo. At this point, Isaac had no idea what their relationship was. They didn't kiss or do anything more physical than cuddle, but they'd been like that before they first started dating in high school, too. Was this simply what a platonic relationship looked like for them? Or was Beck biding his time? Isaac got his answer the next morning, when he came out of his room and found Beck doing push-ups in his living room, shirtless. Isaac tripped over the kitchen chair on his way to the fridge, too busy watching Beck's muscles ripple with his movements. He yelped and crashed on the floor. Isaac, are you okay? Beck jumped to his side. Isaac waved him off, face red. I'm fine. Bare pecs were way too close to his face. They looked firm. Beck must have been working out a lot since college. Chuckling, Beck put a finger under Isaac's chin and tilted his face up. You don't have to be shy. I'm all yours. Isaac swallowed. His head was spinning, and he struggled to remind himself why he wouldn't let himself have this. It was too early for this. He'd only been awake for 10 minutes. The time didn't really matter to either of them. Stop me if you don't want this, Beck whispered, leaning down inch by inch. Did Isaac want to stop it? Beck's lips were warm against his, chapped and rough like always. Fingers traced Isaac's cheek, brushing hair behind his ear and gently angling Isaac's head. He was lightheaded by the time Beck pulled away, heart beating so wildly it was all he could hear. Beck leaned his forehead against Isaac's. I love you so much it terrifies me. Love? The word brought Isaac back to his senses. The kiss had been pleasurable, but compared to what he was used to with Beck, something was missing. Beck no longer meant safety and home to Isaac, and it left a wall between them that he didn't think would ever come down. Isaac. He couldn't bring himself to say anything. It should be easy to let himself fall the rest of the way again. Beck was right there to catch him. But there was one final piece missing between them. Beck pulled away, eyes roaming his face. You don't love me like that, do you? Isaac squeezed his eyes shut and shook his head. Even when part of him wanted to love Beck again and forget everything that happened, the rest of him couldn't. It felt wrong to cry when he was the one rejecting Beck, but tears ran down his face anyway.
I'm sorry, Isaac whispered.
Beck sat down heavily against the cabinets and ran a hand through his hair. I am too, but it's my fault for ruining everything. I have to live with my choices. Tears fell from the corners of his eyes, and he leaned his head back. He'd known letting Beck back into his life would hurt somehow, but Isaac hadn't thought it would be because he couldn't love him anymore. At some point in the last 2 years, the flame he'd harbored for his best friend had dimmed, and there was no more fuel to kindle it. It wasn't fair for that truth to hurt as much as it did. Chapter 36. An unexpected ally. Group chat. Dysfunctional siblings. Nick sent a photo. Image description. Sean Winters stands next to boyfriend, Isaac Green, at the Wilson College Art Gallery. Both have their hands in their own pockets. Green is half turned toward the camera and glaring. The caption reads, Trouble in Paradise? Nick. I thought you said he agreed to go out with you. Nick. This looks like a hostage negotiation. Luna, it could be taken out of context. Luna. Maybe Sean said something really dumb. Nick, that's a given. This is Sean we're talking about. Sean. He still can't stand to be around me and I don't know what else to do. Luna. You know him better than us. What is he like? Sean books? Wait. Sean, I know what to do, thanks. Nick. Please make sure the cameras see this boy smile. It's getting painful to watch. Sean, how do you think I feel? Nick, fair enough. Good luck. Sean reread the messages while he waited for Isaac outside the apartment building, leaning against his car. The group chat was fairly new. Nick started it after taking Sean to visit Tyler. The bulk of their contact was now memes and teasing one another, but it was consistent contact for once in his life and that was exciting. Hey, Isaac greeted, lacking his smile as usual around Sean. Hello. Sean opened the passenger door for him. You're not kidnapping me to the beach again, are you? Isaac asked before stepping closer. I promise we're staying local. But it is a surprise. Isaac sighed and got in the car. The drive was only 15 minutes, but because of the awkward silence it felt twice as long. Sean pulled into the parking lot of a familiar bookstore, and Isaac narrowed his eyes. What are we doing here? If you're like me, you have a list of books you want. So go nuts in there. Pick out all the books you want. Isaac's jaw dropped. Are you serious right now? Excitement and doubt mixed in his voice. Wait, is there a price limit? I could probably spend $1,000 without blinking. You know? Sean held up his father's credit card. It's my dad's money. Please spend $2,000. Isaac glanced at the store. This is why I brought the car, Sean said. He fully anticipated multiple heavy-duty bags. Is this really our date? Are paparazzi waiting inside?
No paparazzi.
I figured there are probably fangirls still looking for you in there. And if not, we'll get Olivia to take a candid picture of us and post it. That counts as an appearance. Heck yeah! Isaac cheered and was out of the car like a shot. Sean laughed and followed him, grabbing a basket next to the door. Isaac combed through every section, steadily filling up baskets as he went. So lost in the excitement of all the new books, he even forgot his feelings about Sean and babbled on about interesting titles and covers. Sean dutifully carried the baskets, smiling as Isaac recounted the backstory of a particular author. This was what he'd missed. He was glad he got to see it at least one more time. Olivia did end up having to take a candid photo of them. Isaac wasn't paying attention, but Sean thought the photo was better for it. It portrayed Isaac's honest enthusiasm, and captured the softest look Sean had ever seen on his own face. He saved it to his phone, and stared at it long after he'd dropped off Isaac and the $900 worth of books he'd bought. A text came in while he looked at it. Isaac, hey, I want to talk to you. Can you meet me at Mountain Cafe tomorrow at 3? Sean, of course. Is everything okay? Isaac. I'll tell you tomorrow. There was nothing more ominous and anxiety-inducing than that. Sean barely slept that night. He had to rearrange some of his schedule, but as soon as he said it was for Isaac, no one had a problem with it, and he arrived half an hour early. At 2:45 Beck walked in. They made eye contact, and Beck headed straight for him and sat down at his table. Thanks for coming, Beck said. You sent the messages? Sean asked. Yeah, probably should have said that, but doesn't matter now. It kind of matters, Sean disagreed. Does Isaac know you used his phone?
No.
After bringing home that many books, I could have hosted a concert and he never would have noticed. He really needs to put a passcode on that thing, Sean muttered. Agreed, but it comes in handy, Beck said. Well, Sean couldn't argue against that. So what do you want? The faint amusement faded from his eyes. I came here to convince Isaac to give me another chance. Pretty bold, considering what you did to him. You're one to talk. Anyway, I tried everything I could. Heck, I'm living with him right now. I have all the excuses I need to flirt and show off. But it's never going to be enough. The admission pleased Sean. He was glad Isaac wasn't giving in to Beck just because of their history. Beck rested his elbows on the table and dragged his hands over his face. I've known for a while, I think just didn't want to admit it. Isaac doesn't love me anymore, not the way I love him. I broke something between us and we can't fix it. I could have told you that a month ago and saved you a lot of time. Shut up, you have no ground to stand on, Mr. Publicity Stunt. Fair point. Beck shook his head. I can't make Isaac love me again. But I still want him to be happy. As much as I hate to admit it, and believe me, I truly hate this, you're part of that. Me? Sean asked in disbelief. He can barely stand to be around me, because he thinks everything you did was a lie, and he wanted it to be real. He's hurt, and this is how he's protecting himself, by not letting himself be close to you again. The only thing I lied about was the media coverage, Sean said. Beck crossed his arms on the table. And the huge book haul? How is that part of the coverage? It wasn't. I mean, we still had one of his old coworkers post a picture of us, but the shopping spree was for him. I wanted to do something that would make him happy. He was trying to set up another day at the animal shelter, but coordinating his schedule with the shelters was proving difficult. Beck nodded. I need you to be straight with me, because I care about Isaac more than anyone in the world, and I won't sit around while you break his heart. That's the last thing I want to do. Then answer this. What does Isaac mean to you? Is he your ticket to freedom? Or something more? He's always been more than a ticket to freedom. The way he looks at me now wouldn't hurt this badly if I didn't care about him so much. Beck stared at him, swore, tilted his face to the ceiling and swore again. Looked back at Sean. All right, I'm going to help you make Isaac happy again. And I swear if he comes back sad and miserable again from your next date, I won't have a career based on my looks, I know, Sean finished. He couldn't believe Beck was offering to help him. They'd literally had a fistfight the first time they met, and Sean figured their acquaintanceship peaked there. You're catching on. Also, if you break his heart the way I did, I know a chick with a freezer who won't ask questions.
Sean blinked.
Can I ask questions?
No.
Truce. Beck held a hand out over the table. Sean was still very confused by this turn of events, but he needed all the help he could get. He took Beck's hand. True. Chapter 37. Not all fans are terrible. The wheels on the shopping cart squeaked. Isaac winced every time he pushed the cart forward, crinkling the list in his hand. After transferring money to Isaac's account to pay for everything, Beck sent him out to do the shopping. Stop hiding in your apartment like a coward, he'd said, shutting the door on Isaac's protests. Now Isaac was here, cart half full of spices he'd never heard of and vegetables he had no idea how to prepare, squeaking his way through the store. There was one more item on the list, but Isaac was having a hard time finding it. Canned jackfruit was not with the other canned vegetables or the fruit, and he'd investigated just about every other aisle. He was about to give up and call Beck when his cart crashed into someone else's. He'd been too busy scanning the shelves, and it looked like the other person had been too. They looked at each other in surprise. Sorry, Isaac said, maneuvering his cart around her. You wouldn't happen to know where the canned jackfruit is, would you? She stared at him. She wore short leggings and a loose tank top, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Chips, pasta, and frozen meals filled her cart. I don't think this store sells something like that. Her eyes narrowed at him. Do I know you? His heart rate spiked. Probably not, I just have one of those faces, you know? He pushed the cart forward, squeaky while protesting. Wait, you're that guy Sean Winters is dating, aren't you? You guys are adorable together. It was the first time anyone had said that in regards to him and Sean, and he turned back to her. You aren't jealous? I mean, I'm jealous you're in a loving relationship while I'm living the single life, but Sean isn't really my type. He's too cool? Except when he looks at you, that's when he looks like he cares about something. Sorry, I'm totally rambling now, this is embarrassing. You don't want to hear this. No, actually it's sweet, thank you, Isaac said. He agreed with the woman. There was a difference between Sean the model and Sean the boyfriend. The model was apathetic and polite, while the boyfriend was sarcastic and kind. Or at least he pretended to be kind. Maybe they weren't so different after all. I'm totally rooting for you guys, by the way, the woman said. I don't know if you're actually having relationship troubles or if that's made up for the views, but I hope it works out for you guys. She gave him a sunny smile, wished him a good day, and then moved on with her shopping. Isaac stayed in the aisle long after she left. That was the first time being recognized hadn't made him want to crawl in a hole for the next 5 years. She'd been so nice and sweet, hadn't even tried to take his picture or anything. It would be creepy if he went to hug her and thank her, but he kind of wanted to. She'd proved not all of Sean's fans were out to ruin his life. She would be so upset in a few months when Sean broke up with him. He didn't even want to imagine what the rest of his fans would be like. They'd eat him alive. Sean's PR team would probably hand over Isaac's social media accounts then too, and he'd be left to deal with the fallout on his own. There was no way he could stay in this city when that happened. Too many people knew he was here. Besides, it didn't look like his job status was changing anytime soon, so he couldn't keep his apartment much longer. The cart squeaked as he turned towards the self-checkout. If he started making plans now, he could be ready to move back in with his mom the day after the fashion show. He'd take weekly trips with Beck to ferry over his books and whatever else he didn't need, start selling off some of his furniture. The second Sean was free from his father, Isaac would be gone, disappearing from the celebrity spotlight as quickly as he'd arrived. And this time Sean wouldn't know where to find him. That thought should make him happy, but his heart ached at losing contact with Sean forever. He never loved you, Isaac reminded himself quietly. He was pretending the whole time. But thinking of that beach trip, with no cameras in sight and Sean reading quietly to him, Isaac had to wonder why Sean would do so much for a pretend relationship. Sean had been worried about losing him on that trip. Was that worry about what losing Isaac would mean for the deal with his father, or had it been something else? Isaac shook his head. He didn't want to get his hopes up. Sean was a shallow celebrity just like all the others, and he'd be better off once they cut contact after the fashion show. Moving would be good. It would give him a chance to figure out his career, and give him a chance to become an anonymous person again. It was for Chapter 38. Kittens made it worse. The flowers didn't go over as well as Sean hoped. Isaac took the bundle of sunflowers with a quiet thanks and tossed them on the table. He'd always made sure to put flowers in water before, and had been careful with the delicate petals. Sean shared a look with Beck, who sat on the couch looking as disappointed as Sean felt. They'd been Beck's idea. Isaac lives for that cheesy romance junk. Flowers, chocolates, dumb stuffed bears, he melts over that stuff, Beck had said after they'd called a truce. Sean remembered how Isaac reacted to the flowers he used to bring to the bookstore all the time. Even after running out of vases at home, Isaac had used his cups and water bottles to keep every flower alive. His apartment had looked like a florist's shop the first time Sean was here. He wondered when Isaac had thrown all the flowers out. Had they survived the night Sean was kicked out? Did they last a few days? Ready? Isaac prompted, standing in front of the door. Yeah, ready, Sean said. He took Isaac to the same restaurant as their first date. Isaac wore slacks and a button-down this time, but he looked more out of place now than he had before. Dinner was more awkward this time too. They'd been photographed on the way in, and Sean was pretty sure the couple at the table in the corner were undercover paparazzi, so he tried to make comments on how tired Isaac was to cover up the stilted conversation between them. They didn't even finish the meal before asking for Togo boxes in the check. Flowers didn't work, romantic candlelight dinners didn't work. What else was Sean supposed to do? Beck texted him an hour after Sean dropped Isaac off at his apartment. Beck. He's not crying after that, but you and your pretty face are on thin ice. Sean, you're supposed to be helping, not threatening. Beck. Threatening is how I help. Sean. This may be a surprise then, but it's not helpful. Beck. You turned down most of my ideas, what more do you want? Beck's date ideas had been things like bowling or hiking, active and competitive things that Sean had little to no practice with. Although humiliating himself with 10 frames of gutter balls might endear him to Isaac, even if the media crucified him for it. Was he that desperate yet? Beck. What made him agree to date you in the first place? Recreate that. Sean, I don't think setting up a mugging is a good idea or believable. Beck. Beck. I'm going to need a lot more details on that.
Sean, later.
Ideas first. Beck. You did the book thing already, I don't know, puppies? Sean. Oh, hang on, I forgot about that. Thanks. Beck. Make him happy or else. Sean ignored the latest threat and switched over to his emails. The shelter was all for hosting another adoption photo shoot, but Sean's schedule wasn't as flexible with less than 2 months before the fashion show. His father dragged him in for fittings all the time, and if he wasn't with him, Luna used him to test makeup. Plus, his father had booked him for photo shoots constantly, preparing for Sean's departure from the modeling world and using Sean while he still had him. He couldn't predict his availability too far in advance, which made planning a day with the shelter, who did need a reasonable amount of time to prepare, rather difficult. His liaison with the shelter, Georgia, suggested doing something more informal. Her latest email invited him and Isaac to drop by when they had time, and they'd just take candid photos while they played with the cats. Sean jumped on the chance. 2 days later, he and Isaac walked into the shelter. Isaac couldn't contain his grin beside him. Georgia met them in the cat room. "Hey guys. Good to see you again. Thanks for letting us back," Isaac said. He already had his fingers pushed through the bars of a cage, scratching a tabby cat under the chin. "My pleasure," Georgia said. "But we're not going to have any fainting scares today, right?" She gave Sean a pointed look. "No fainting," he promised. "I won't let him see if I start bleeding," Isaac agreed. "As long as there's a plan. Now you ready? We'll start with Patrick there." She opened the cage and pulled out the tabby Isaac was petting, putting him right in Isaac's arms. Patrick snuggled into Isaac's chest, and Isaac cooed over him. Georgia used her phone to snap some pictures. "He's such a sweetheart," Isaac said, looking up at Sean with his beaming smile. Sean smiled back, tension easing in his chest. He could look at that smile for the rest of his life. Georgia handed Sean a tuxedo cat and had him stand next to Isaac. "You boys are fabulous. Half our dogs were adopted within 2 weeks of that photo shoot, you know. The kennel hasn't been that empty in a long time." "That's great," Isaac said. "I'm so glad we could help." "Yes, that's wonderful to hear," Sean agreed. "I have high hopes for the kitties," Georgia said, snapping one more photo. "All right, next ones." They posed with new cats, separately and together, and continued to make their way around the room. Isaac didn't stop smiling, and Sean couldn't stop looking at him, at how happy he was. Couldn't stop thinking of how much he loved that smile, and the boy behind it. He froze, and a squirmy short hair jumped out of his arms. Georgia scooped the cat up and handed her back to Sean, and he held her to his chest, hoping to hide his racing heart. He wanted Isaac by his side all the time, wanted to make him happy and make all his dreams come true. Sean would be content to spend the rest of his life in this room with Isaac. He loved Isaac. "Hey, what's wrong?" Isaac asked. "You're really pale." "Not again, sit down," Georgia ordered. Sean numbly sat in the chair pushed behind his knees. He loved Isaac, had been in love with the man for ages, and in less than 2 months, he'd never see him again. Chapter 39. Beck has opinions on Isaac's choices. Beck wasn't at the apartment when Isaac brought home a bunch of empty boxes, and since Isaac started with the books in his room, it took a few days until Beck even knew about them. He knocked on the partially open door. "Hey Dinnerzari, what are you doing?" Isaac transferred books from his shelf to the box. There was a stack of packed boxes next to the door already, and he deconstructed one of his bookshelves. "Packing?" "Yeah, I see that. Why?" "Because I'm moving back into Mom's house after this stupid fashion show," Isaac said. "Why?" Beck repeated, voice strained. Isaac looked up at him. "Do I really have to explain?" Beck exhaled and pinched the bridge of his nose.
No.
"You're choosing to run away like always. This shouldn't surprise me at all." "We can't all punch our way through our problems," Isaac retorted, grabbing another book and shoving it in the box. "I mean, you'd probably feel a lot better if you punched him," Beck muttered. "I'm not going to punch him," Isaac stated. "Besides, it's not just him. I don't want to deal with the fans after they hear we broke up, and I need to figure out what I'm doing with my career. It makes sense to move back home for a while." Beck watched him finish the box without saying anything. Isaac fit the flaps under each other and looked up at him. "You going to say anything or just glare at me?" In answer, Beck turned on his heel and stormed out. Isaac sighed and tilted his face up. When he finally came out for dinner, Beck had left a plate for him on the table but was nowhere in the apartment. Beck's disapproval shouldn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Isaac didn't need his permission, nor had he asked for it. But his disapproval did have Isaac second-guessing his decision, and he tossed and turned all night thinking about it. Was it smarter to go back home while things settled, or was he only running away the way he always did? He didn't get out of bed until almost 10 the next morning, and he found Beck waiting for him, fully dressed. "Finally, put some pants on, we're going out." "Not again." Isaac was getting very tired of everyone dragging him around. The next person who orders me to get dressed so they can drag me somewhere against my will is getting a bucket of ice down their shirt. I'm not afraid of some ice. Now hurry up. I'll buy you coffee while we're out. What about breakfast? Beck held up a bag of dry cereal. I'll concede cereal is practical in cases like this. Wow, Beck really wanted Isaac to leave with him. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me where we're going. Nowhere in particular, Beck said. I need some more stock photos, and you need to not be holed up in these four walls all day. So, you just want me to follow you around all day while you take pictures? That was not exactly Isaac's idea of a good time. When they'd still been together maybe, but even with their relationship whatever it was right now, Isaac could only picture himself being bored out of his mind. Would you rather mindlessly scroll job boards and write more cover letters? Isaac twitched. The thought of filling out another job application that made him repeat all the information in his resume made him want to stab his hand with a fork. I'll get dressed. Beck nodded and started gathering his work bag while Isaac went back into his room. 10 minutes later, Isaac munched on Chex Mix while they strolled through the city. It was fascinating to see Beck at work. The little things that Isaac paid no attention to would catch Beck's eye, like a dandelion growing through a crack in the sidewalk, or the pattern on a manhole cover. Isaac eyed that one. People really want pictures of manhole covers? The pattern makes a good geometric background, Beck said. Teachers use them a lot. Not an application Isaac would have thought of, but he trusted Beck knew more about this than he did, so he let it go. All in all, the day wasn't that bad. It was even fun pointing out the little things in the city, and helping Beck get the angle he needed for the pictures. Plus, he did have to admit, the change of scenery from his apartment walls was welcome. They got hot dogs for lunch and ate them in the park, Isaac sitting on the bench like a normal person, and Beck sitting on the table with his feet on the bench. So, Beck started. Isaac stiffened. Here it was, the real reason Beck dragged him along today. Do you actually want to move back in with your mom? Shrugging, Isaac took another bite of his hot dog. Moving back feels kind of like I failed, but I'm looking forward to seeing her more. And this whole thing with Sean. You're okay leaving him behind? There went his appetite. Isaac lowered the hot dog. It's for the best. But is that what you want? Beck pushed. It doesn't matter what I want. A relationship has to go two ways. Sean doesn't want this, so I need to accept that and move on. You could fight for it, Beck suggested. Isaac smiled sadly and looked across the park, at the empty swing set. What's the point? If Sean doesn't return my feelings, then I'm just hurting us both. And what are your feelings? Beck asked. They don't matter, Isaac insisted. Yes, they do, Beck said. Why are we even talking about this? Isaac stood from the table and stepped away from Beck. Beck jumped down after him. Because I think you're about to make a huge mistake, and I'm not going to let you hurt yourself like this. Sean doesn't love me back, Isaac exclaimed, whirled back around to face Beck. Only after the words were out of his mouth did he realize what he'd said. His face colored, but it was too late to take it back. Beck didn't look surprised by his outburst anyway. Of course not. He knew Isaac better than anyone, and he'd probably known for weeks. You really love him after everything he did? Isaac choked on something between a sob and laughter. Yeah, the jerk used me for his own selfish reasons, cost me my job and my writing career, and I fell in love with him. Sean had always been so much more than the media hassle surrounding him. Sean was surprise visits at work with flowers because he missed Isaac. He was an attentive listener while Isaac rambled about his writing. He was unexpected humor and endless kindness. His big dream once he was free from his father was to run an animal sanctuary. And really, knowing what little Isaac did of Sean's childhood and his siblings, he didn't blame the man for being desperate to escape his father. If Isaac had been in the same position, he wasn't sure he could have made a different choice. I love him, Isaac whispered, clutching his shirt and twisting it in his fingers over the pain in his chest. But he doesn't love me. He never did. I was just a tool. Beck raised a brow. I still don't like him, so you can trust me when I tell you, you're more than a tool to him. Shrugging, Isaac wiped his face. He wasn't crying yet, but it wouldn't take much. You are, Beck insisted. So you need to decide if you love him enough to fight for your happiness with him. You're the one who ultimately decides if you and him will work out. Isaac sniffed. He didn't believe he meant anything more to Sean than a key to Sean's freedom. If anything, Sean probably thought of them as good friends. But if they were friends, could Isaac get Sean to fall in love with him for real? Was it possible for them to still be happy together? Could Isaac forgive Sean for using him the way he did, when he'd barely been able to forgive Beck for cheating on him. Did he want to? Chapter 40. Sean is unbalanced. Eric Winters leaned back in his seat at the kitchen table. Sean almost never saw him for breakfast. Usually he was working out while Eric ate, and then Eric went into the office while Sean cleaned up and got ready. Their morning routines rarely crossed. Unless one of them made a special exception like Sean had this morning. Explain your reasoning, Eric said. He scooped another forkful of eggs into his mouth. Sean kept his back straight in the chair across from him, hands folded neatly on the table. I don't want to earn my freedom from the conservatorship because I used someone else. Isaac suffered because of what I did, and my freedom shouldn't mean his pain. The deal's off. Eric lowered his fork. The damage is already done. What good does calling off our deal now accomplish? That was a hard question to answer because Eric was right. The fashion show was in 3 weeks, and Sean couldn't turn back time to undo all the harm the media had brought to Isaac's life. He wouldn't even see much of Isaac with the show so close, and could probably get away with avoiding him altogether. His freedom was in his grasp, if he'd swallow his guilt and accept it. But Isaac's words when Sean told him about the bargain rattled in his head. I was an assignment to you? Paired with the heartbroken look on his face, Sean had barely slept in the last few weeks. We'll still have to live with what I've done, Sean admitted. But I don't want to think back on the time I spent with him as if he was just a means to an end. He means more to me than that. He'd finally figured it out around 3 in the morning, while he tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Isaac wouldn't forgive him because Sean had apologized while asking for permission to continue doing what hurt him. Sean wouldn't have forgiven himself either, if their positions were reversed. Eric tapped his fork against the plate. You realize what you're giving up, don't you? He inhaled deeply and shut his eyes. Yes. Free access to his own bank accounts, the chance to leave this cutthroat modeling world, to get out of this house once and for all. He was willing to give it all up to prove to himself that Isaac wasn't just a means to an end. He hadn't dated him because he wanted something from him. He hadn't fallen in love with Isaac because he meant Sean could finally live. I never should have agreed to the deal in the first place, Sean said. It wasn't fair to Isaac. Eric stared at him for a moment. You know, we're close enough to the show we could consider the conditions of the deal met. The show itself is garnering enough attention. Your tabloid appearances are hardly necessary. Don't do that, Sean snapped. His hand shook on the table. Don't put me in that position. He couldn't let himself have his freedom this way. The end of his conservatorship couldn't be tied to Isaac and the suffering he went through. Calling the deal off and finding another way to end it was the only way Sean could face the future. This boy really means this much to you that you'd give up the only thing you want just to preserve your memories? I don't expect someone like you to understand, Sean snarled. Of course Eric didn't understand the idea of giving up what he wanted for the sake of someone else. This was the man who kept his son locked up in a mental ward to prevent negative media attention, who threatened his in-laws to protect his violent legacy. Eric slammed the side of his fist on the table and Sean jumped. Watch your tone. I might never have earned a Father of the Year award, but I am still your father, and you will treat me with the respect I deserve. Sean narrowed his eyes. I'll give you as much respect as you earn. He pushed himself up from the table. I just wanted to tell you the deal was off. We're done here. They would end up screaming at each other if one of them didn't leave soon. You're sure about this? Eric called after him. I can call the judge and start the paperwork today if you want. The key to his freedom was right there. But if Sean took it, he'd never be able to live with himself. All the freedom in the world wouldn't matter if he'd hurt someone he loved to get it. Sean inhaled and hardened his resolve. I'm sure. Eric hummed. Disappointing, but if that's what you want, so be it. Sean turned back, but Eric had gone back to his breakfast and was no longer looking at Sean. Facing forward, Sean went to his room. If he didn't distrust his father on principle, he'd almost think the man wanted to grant Sean his freedom. But that couldn't be right because Eric was the one with the power to end the conservatorship. If he wanted to give it to Sean, he could just end it. There was no need for all these hoops. He wanted something. What did he have to gain from Sean's freedom, though? Sean's gratitude? He highly doubted that was what the man was after. What would he do with it? Was he just ready to let Sean go? Sean almost laughed at the thought. Even if he couldn't see his father's ulterior motives, there was still no way his dad wanted him to be free. He had nothing to gain from it. So what was his father up to?